President Biden is pledging to overhaul the country's long-standing refugee program. He's rolling back a Trump-era policy to allow more children who are fleeing from violence into the U.S. It comes at a time when the number of illegal border crossings are rising. A new government report reveals the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency detained about 78,000 migrants along the southwest border in January. That's about 3,000 apprehensions per day and a jump of 6% from December. In 1 month, Border Patrol agents detained nearly 65,000 single adults and 6,000 unaccompanied minors. Agents also took in another 7,500 who were parents and children traveling together. CBS News, Homeland Security, and Justice reporter Nicole Sganga joins me now. Hi there, Nicole. So what else do we know about what's behind the rise in border crossings and the Biden administration's plans to address it?
Well, Elaine, when you look at this government data, it shows that the number of migrant families and children and unaccompanied children who were arrested at the U.S. border with Mexico by Border Patrol agents did increase in January when you compare the numbers to December. That said, adult migrants who were traveling alone without children continue to make up the bulk of these arrests. So out of the 78,000 arrests in January, nearly 65,000 of those involve single adults. Now, officials continue to also express concern about smuggling operations at the U.S. border. In fact, just yesterday, a South Texas grand jury indicted a Houston man for smuggling 119 undocumented individuals across the border. Two other things to keep in mind here. The first is that we are still amid this pandemic, and most of these migrants are still being sent back to Mexico under a Trump-era policy issued by the CDC back last April. And DHS officials also stressing to reporters on a call last night that they're seeing high rates of recidivism or repeat offenders. So CBP officials telling CBS News that 38% of arrests along the southern border since last March involved migrants who were actually previously detained. We also know that the Biden administration is planning to overhaul the U.S. refugee program. In fact, CBS News has learned that the Biden administration plans to offer humanitarian refuge to more children fleeing violence from around the world. That's according to a government report obtained by my CBS News colleague, Camilo Montoya Galvez.
Well, Nicole, does the Biden administration plan to build Republican consensus on this issue or try to forge ahead with only Democratic support?
Well, the short answer is no, the former, Elaine. Biden's immigration proposal aims to create a legal path to citizenship for millions of undocumented individuals already integrated into the U.S. economy right now. So it would create a 5-year path to legal residency after background checks, and then an additional 3-year path to becoming a U.S. citizen. But we've seen a lot of GOP opposition already, and Senate Republicans considered likely to block this bill. That said before, if you're saying, where have I seen this before? The answer is 2005, when then Senator John McCain sponsored a bill with bipartisan support trying to pass immigration reform, and it got nowhere in Congress. So what is Plan B for the Biden administration? They are going to continue to push through many of these executive actions that we've seen, undoing the Trump administration's former immigration policy. Just today, President Biden and the White House formally terminating former President Trump's 2-year-old declaration of a national emergency at the U.S. and Mexico border. That will stop the flow of government funds to building that border wall we heard so much about during the Trump administration.
Well, Nicole, moving on to cybersecurity, the House Committee on Homeland Security held a hearing on Wednesday on the cyber threats facing the U.S., and Chris Krebs was one of many expert witnesses. He is the former director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, who was fired by President Trump. Now, here's a little of what he said posed a significant threat.
The cyber threat landscape is more complicated than ever. with foreign governments and criminal gangs alike using capabilities that enable everything from run-of-the-mill cybercrime, information operations, intellectual property theft, destructive attacks, and operations with kinetic effects. The bulk of the malicious cyber activity targeting the United States emanates from 4 countries: Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Even in those countries, the difference between state action and criminal activity is increasingly blurred as contracted or proxy cyber actors support or act on behalf of state-directed operations. As long as the tools are available, vulnerabilities exist, money and secrets are to be had, and a lack of meaningful consequences persist, there will be malicious cyber actors.
I mean, Nicole, it sounds like a really complex landscape. What were some of the recommendations on improving cybersecurity from Krebs and other experts?
Yeah, Elaine, we should say that this was a really dramatic hearing from former cyber leaders in government. Former Director of National Intelligence Sue Gordon currently likening the state of data protection in the United States to the 1929 stock market crash. You know, we heard Chris Krebs there. He urged Congress not to wait for a cyber, quote unquote, Pearl Harbor moment before taking action. You know, some of these fears of domestic attacks on the nation's infrastructure connected to the internet, things like the power grid, oil and gas lines, are stemming from one event that occurred earlier this week. Florida town's water supply was hacked into after an unidentified actor attempted to poison the water in Oldsmore, Florida. We can talk more about that later, but the reason I bring it up is because it is really behind a lot of the policy recommendations we heard from those leaders yesterday as they testified before Congress. And what it boils down to is funneling more resources and more funds into some of these state and municipal localities so that they can shore up their cyber networks. Another really big suggestion that we heard from several leaders was to make CISA, which is the cyber arm of Homeland Security, the Chief Information Security Officer for the federal government's 101 civilian agencies. That would really take the burden off of a lot of these smaller civilian agencies and enable them to outsource at least some of their cyber challenges to CISA, which could help them.
So you raised that Oldsmar breach in our final minute here. What is the very latest on that investigation and the implications here nationally?
Well, we should caution that this is an ongoing investigation. Federal officials, however, have confirmed to CBS News that whoever is behind this attack accessed the water treatment plant remotely through a software called TeamViewer. It was installed on the computers at the water treatment plant. The computers there shared the same password across the board. They were also connected directly to the internet without firewall protection using Windows 7. Now, if that sounds nightmarish for some of us who have advanced on to Windows 10, it's not uncommon. In fact, Chris Krebs called Oldsmore, Florida, really the rule, not the exception during yesterday's hearing. And Oldsmore, Florida, a town of 14,000, if at all, might not seem like the likely culprit of this massive cyber massacre, but it's not unlike a lot of towns and cities across the country that connect critical infrastructure directly to the internet. So it is really sounding the alarms for many of these state and local municipalities who now really do have to shore up their cyber networks to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like a wake-up call. All right, Nicole Sganga for us. Nicole, thank you very much.
Thank you.